Welcome to Establish the Edge. I'm your host, Mike Leone, back for another edition of the GPP Game Scores podcast with Adam Rauch. Before diving into that, I want to let you all know that this podcast is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. If you use promo code ETR over there, you'll get an instant deposit match bonus up to $100 if you're first time depositor. So if you haven't checked out Underdog yet, please make sure you do that. Use promo code ETR. You can play in their weekly battle royale contests, which are snake draft, DFS style contests. A lot of fun, different alternative to playing DFS. And as fresh games are, there's always a decent edge to be had before it's been sort of solved by the community. We also have rankings for their ongoing playoff best ball contest, which another thing that are a lot of fun and a good thing to get into early while the edge is a bit stronger with more uncertainty surrounding the playoff teams. All right, let's look at the game scores, the game stacking from last week. Adam, my co-host here, had a really good thread on Twitter. You can follow him at A Rauch, RAUCH1 on Twitter. Adam, why don't you break down a little bit what we saw last week in the slant on DraftKings?
Yeah, last week was a bit of an interesting week. We had some games that popped that I don't think we expected to pop as much, and particularly the Seahawks-Rams game, but that was more kind of like a good team stacking spot for the Seahawks. So not a great game stack per se, but Geno, Lock, and Metcalf stacks were, in my opinion, they were the best value stack on the week. 88, almost 89 points from Geno, Lockett, and Metcalf as a stack, and only at 9% roughly, and that's cumulative, not even average. So
yeah,
that was a good stack, and I think one of our subscribers, the guy, I forget his name, Will, who won the Million Maker last year.
Yeah, he won the afternoon slate with it.
Yeah. So that was a good stack.
I just wanted to put like Noah Fant too. I think scored like 14 points as like a 3K tight end. That absolutely you could have tripled and played Cam Akers. You had like the lowest own thing out there. I late swapped onto some stuff with Geno that I thought saved me from a min cash, and then there was a stat correction and I ended up bubbling.
Dang, stat corrections getting this every time. I wanted to also touch on that Lions-Jags game from last week, because I think as far as chalky stacks are concerned, this one, I mean, even though we didn't have so much ceiling outside of maybe Jared Goff and Amon-Ra, it was definitely the most played successful stack. It was in the most top 1% and top 10% lineups on the slant. Any stack with Goff, Amon-Ra, Christian Kirk, or even DJ Chark, because Chark was a great low salary option, ended up with almost 15 points at less than 5%. So that stack stood out, even though you kind of had to be on Amon-Ra to get there. But if you faded, Travis Etienne or Zay Jones, who ended up getting over 10% there, you can see he was at almost 12.5%. You were looking pretty good there. So that was another good one. And then only other one that I thought maybe stood out because it finished with the highest average points slate was the Raiders and Chargers. But unfortunately, even though we got the ceiling game from Devontae, we just didn't really, and we got a good game from Keenan Allen too, who ended up coming in less than 10%. So that ended up being an okay value there. We didn't really get the elevation on the quarterbacks, as Justin Herbert and Derek Carr kind of finished between 17 and 20 points each. So, that you want to touch on that game a little bit?
Yeah, it's a couple of things on that game. One, something I've become more open to is playing, the concentrated teammates on a team that could put up some points without necessarily game stacking. And what's interesting, some of the stuff we're looking at, the Million Maker winner was, the Goff single stack with Amon-Ra St. Brown, bringing it back with, I think it was the actually brought back Evan Ingram as a leverage piece, and then had kind of like the 5 highest owned guys, but that included Josh Jacobs and Devontae Adams. So just playing those double teammates who can get there in a really concentrated offense. I think it's really tough when hand building to click those two teammates, not in a game stack or when they're running back wide receiver, thinking that they cannibalize each other too much. But it's something that like we've seen it with Dalvin Cook and Justin Jefferson at times, that, and I think, this week, another example might be Joe Mixon if he's back and we think he's healthy to get the full role, and Jamar Chase. Like, I think there are ways that, these offenses just play really well. They get there. The quarterback doesn't necessarily have a huge game because it's a mixture of like kind of the alpha receiving game and then some rushing with it. So that's something I'm open to. And then on the Keenan Allen point, is just a good example of how it's been tough this year in GPP when the chalk hits with like Amon-Ra last week, Garrett Wilson. The 555 million maker winner literally had the 3 cash game wide receivers in his wide receiver spots, and then Adams late in flex. And sometimes the theory behind stack is you hit big with Devontae Adams, you hit decent with Josh Jacobs, and you get a low owned guy who's fine in Keenan Allen, and that gets you there. But the low owned guy who's fine doesn't get you there when the chalk hits. So that's been, one of the difficult parts, at least for me, for GPP this season, and it hasn't certainly run my way.
One more quick game I want to touch on before we head into this week was the Eagles-Titans game. And that game was looking really good at the beginning of this game. And you can see Jalen Hurts put up a massive performance. A.J. Brown got elevated as well, got to nearly 35 points and these were at low ships. And we were kind of on this game last week. We were talking about it. What was really unfortunate was that Treylon Burks scores pretty early in the game and then gets hurt and kind of kills the game stack. If Burks hadn't gotten hurt, I think we would be like, that game would have been the best on the slate from a true game stacking perspective, because you could have easily played Hurts and Brown and brought it back with Burks, and you would have been looking real solid. But unfortunately, Treylon just left early.
Yeah, Treylon leaving early was really frustrating. I had this double stack. I actually wasn't sure. I was like, I think I have to alpha stack it. And then I just leaned into the correlation doubled, was really happy to do that. And then again, with the chalk hitting like AJ Brown in a weird way, like you could win with him. He put up 35, but Devontae Adams outscores him at 15% ownership. And you also have, Garrett Wilson and Amon-Ra do really well. And it was another frustrating stack that ended up like not mattering in a huge way. Again, like you could have gotten there, but you didn't absolutely have to have the stack, which was, frustrating. Because I think we were on, Brown got steamed a little bit with the revenge game narrative, but it was still fine at 10%. And then the Hurts Devonta stuff at 5% was really, really good. Well, let's move on to this week and take a look at the game scores for this week. And Adam, as you had kind of DM'd me ahead of time, a lot of gross game totals on this slate.
The third highest total on this slate is 44.5.
It's so wild.
It's one of those weeks. It's one of those weeks.
And you can see it up here. We don't have the article out yet. Every time I show this, people ask me where the article is, and the game scores table just auto updates to what we have. So I'm looking at an old article with the new table, but Adam will have the write up sometime tonight, I believe. So the top game scores Cleveland at Cincinnati, and that one's a little bit tough because the best way to attack Cleveland has been via the ground. And we saw how bad Watson was last week, and you could see where that might not shape up to hit in a huge way. The Mixon P. Ryan stuff will be interesting. Right now we have, I'm trying to word this right. As far as the workload distribution between Mixon and P. Ryan, we have P. Ryan kind of at like the height of his workload when it was having Mixon, but it's possible that gets split even further in Mixon's first game back, given that P. Ryan just played really, really well. Sometimes it seems obvious in these situations, like, of course you're going to keep playing P. Ryan more after he played well. But I have seen these situations where they just go right back to the lead back, and that's not the case at all, even though you think it would be. So it's really a guessing game there. it's also tough. Like Burrow's going to be one of the most popular quarterbacks. Again, these are our initial ownership is like straight default algorithm, probably going to boost Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. T. Higgins was limited in practice. We'll keep an eye on that. So yeah, you certainly see where the upside is if Cleveland can push, but it's it's going to carry a little bit of ownership, and you can also see where it could go wrong.
Yeah, Cleveland's offense did not look very good at all last week, just from a watch the tape perspective. And I was kind of hoping we would get maybe a little bit of an ownership discount on the Bengals this week because they kind of failed as a game stack last week, even though Burrow kind of got there on his own. He didn't really take Chase or Higgins with him. But I don't think we're really going to get that, especially at these. We're looking at these baseline ownerships as of this morning. I don't think they're going to go down by any means. The one interesting pivot you could go to on the Cincinnati side, which I don't think will get steamed too much, maybe Tyler Boyd. He's not a great value, but it seems like these weeks where Cincinnati are in good spots and we want to focus on Chase and Higgins. I think people often forget about Boyd. He's still an integral part of their offense, and they look at him a lot. He had an egregious drop last week.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Egregious.
In the breadbasket touchdown.
Right.
And Adam played him last week, and we talked about in the GPP recap. But I do think sometimes these third wide receivers on a team where that third wide receiver has the carved out role, like Tyler Boyd's playing every snap basically. And two, team's going to put up a lot of points. I think there's a bit more juice there than we realize. They're not as fun or as sexy, but I agree with you. The masochistic way to play this, and I played a lot of Watson last week, would be to say, hey, first game back was a tough game, but we're overreacting to how bad Watson was last week, and maybe we should play him because Watson stacks will be low owned. I think Amari's for sure going to carry ownership, but Donovan Peoples-Jones, just kind of one of those pretty good ceiling plays in the mid tier. And then we'll see what happens at tight end. I believe Njoku was back at limited practice. We currently have him assumed out. So probably no one's going to go back to the tight end position with how bad Bryant was last week. And if Njoku plays, sometimes people stay away from this injured guy. So that would be a real out there strategy, but it is a way to get pretty low owned. And if Watson's successful, I think like almost assuredly someone on Cincinnati's having like a really, really high end performance.
Yeah, definitely want to keep an eye on Njoku's health.
Yeah, and then zooming back out, like as bad as the game totals are this week, one point I want to make, like right now, the cash game lineups look a little shaky as far as the players that are in them. So as shaky as the game stacks look, you may have the situation that hasn't been happening so far this year where you get a game stack and it hits in a way where you get one really big hit and maybe like a couple options that are just okay and that you avoid the bust. Like that could be enough this week if we get some cash game failures on, a cash game lineup that looks at this point to me like whatever you're rolling cash is going to have something a little bit shaky. But we'll see how that develops. The game that will likely end up getting steamed a lot is Minnesota at Detroit. And as you mentioned with the game totals, they're also bad in this game, just outlier high game total in quote unquote Coors Field of Detroit. What's crazy is Detroit's favored in this game, despite the records of these two teams. I saw a tweet about if you flipped every one score game, what every team's record would be, and Minnesota would be 1-11. So they're running pretty pure with their plus 10 point differential at 10-2. But as far as fantasy goes, that's not a bad thing that they're not an amazing team because we get a projected close game. And yeah, you can see we have ownership here. And again, this is just default based on projection. So if we give these guys a manual bump based on like people playing correlation, these guys are going to come in at an even higher clip. And then Amon-Ra just every week, like he's just too cheap. This dude for his target share and his talent level is just too cheap. It climbs up. And then Swift emerging a little bit last week too takes away Yeah, I guess if you went back to Jamal Williams at really low ownership, I personally just don't like. I know it's happened like 4 times already this season, but you kind of need the multiple touchdown game for Jamal Williams to play off, and it's hard for me to play that knowing you absolutely need it.
Yeah, it's hard, and especially if you play, on DraftKings like I do, it's pretty hard to click Jamal Williams there, knowing he's just not going to get the passing game work. And now Swift is coming back and getting an elevated role. But this game, I mean, take the ownership out of the equation for a second. I mean, it's just the best pure game environment from a ceiling and a total perspective. Well, I would say actually maybe not the pure best ceiling. I mean, that Bengals Browns game has a good ceiling too, but this one also has a great ceiling and has great value. And yeah, like you said, Amon-Ra is just really hard to get off of. Like he's just such a good value every week. We even know he's going to be like last week. We knew he was going to get steamed, and he still ended up smashing. Was like one of the top receiver plays on the week. So it's really hard to get away from those really good values, especially on a week like this. I do wonder how the secondary or the backup receiver role for Detroit is going to shake out. Last week, we kind of talked about DJ Chark being that good value option. And even though he didn't get to maybe 20, the 20-point threshold that we usually like to see on a cheap receiver, he got pretty close and he was still pretty low owned.
Yeah.
Jameson Williams played only 8 snaps. I think he just drew 1 target last week, but I don't know if you have any kind of inkling on Jameson Williams, if he's going to have any kind of increased role.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he ramped up a little bit. I think I'd be surprised if he ramped up a lot, especially the way this team's playing right now. They're playing real good. Yeah. They're technically still alive in the playoff race. So I think I would be going back to Chark, who I could see boosted a little bit. I don't think he'll be high on, but he might be more like the 6 to 8% instead of like 3%, just because I think everyone in this game with a pulse is gonna get played a little bit, and that includes him as a way to get some cap relief. The Amon-Ra stuff is tough. I mean, it's just hard when the cash game wide receiver is crushing every week, and when they have a target share like this, there's less routes to really big failure, especially in a game like this that projects to be a shootout a little bit. I will say last week, like as insane as his performance was, like he wasn't that far away from being like sub 100 with 1 touchdown, which would be like pretty survivable. It'd be a really good score. Like you'd happily take low 20s even at 7K, but it'd be one where it's like, oh, that was a chance to get Jamar Chase at half the ownership and him maybe scoring 35.
Yeah.
So, but that didn't happen. He did find the end zone a second time and get over the bonus threshold. But just point out, like it's sometimes a fine line between a guy being having to have him in your lineup and being pretty survivable. But yeah, it is not a Justin Jefferson almost every week is like a really good GPP play because he comes in too low owned, and it doesn't seem like it's going to be this week. I should point out, people are this year more than any other year, the pricing has driven people towards really balanced lineups. And this week early on, we get some situations that allow people to build studs and duds. And they're shaky duds, but they allow people. And I'm going to go to this KC Denver game next, even though it's not next in game scores to demonstrate that. But we see a lot of ownership on the Denver side. On FanDuel, when I quickly ran stuff this morning, we're still tweaking stuff. It's early Friday, but like Latavius Murray was actually in the FanDuel optimal lineup as a really cheap running back. And then there's definitely some concerns there with Mike Boone back, though, that we're going to look into a little closer. But then on DraftKings, Dulcich and Kendall Hinton were in our optimal lineup as punts. And it looks like Cortland Sutton's probably going to miss at this point in time. He did not practice Wednesday or Thursday. And these guys let you get someone in. There's cheap Texans wide receivers that are super gross, but they have no one to throw to that whoever you project to lead the team in targets is going to be like 3K, and that person's going to project as an okay value. So that's how you get there. But yeah, this Denver game, I wish it was on a different slate. I think, rolling out Russ stuff might be kind of interesting, hoping he recaptures that magic, but I don't think you can take the chance on how bad Russ has been when you're playing it into chalk. Because I think Hinton's going to actually end up getting boosted once, if Sutton is ruled out. This is kind of a tame ownership projection.
Right.
Judy would be the guy that like was definitely limited last week. There's still not like a clear check on health. He's in the mid tier. People definitely feel more comfortable clicking the mega punts when it's a bad team situation like Denver has been thus far.
Yeah, you just want to be like you said, you just want to be mindful of playing into chalk here. Playing Denver was already a shaky proposition,
right?
Heading into this week, and now we're talking about playing them against a Chiefs team where they're heavy dogs and they're going to be chalk. It seems a little scary to me. But yeah, it's kind of hard to resist the lower priced options. But I kind of have a feeling it's going to be more of a KC team stack week, maybe more so than like a Denver Kansas City game stack.
Yeah, I would say if I'm stacking KC, I'm probably eating the chalk on one of the Denver punts. Just like at that point, if I'm going to eat the chalk in GPP, it's going to be in a correlated fashion. And I might not try to thread the needle where KC hits in a big way, but those cheap Denver guys don't. KC, again, like I think the ownerships on KC are going to come up for stacking with Mahomes. MVS in particular, I think will come up as the Sky Moore experiment ended disastrously last week, and his ownership got way out of control, which was nuts. I was on him and ended up swapping off him late because of the ownership steam, and my teams were a little bit in trouble anyways. Juju's the guy that I can't. It feels like things were finally happening for him, and then he got the concussion, and now he's had 2 bad games, and I don't feel great about him, but I just don't see any way he's like highly owned. But he does seem to keep coming in like that 8 to 10% bucket as opposed to sub 5.
He's the guy this year for me that I just have, even though the box scores and the performances don't necessarily dictate it, it always sticks out as like an appealing option because he's never too expensive. And outside of maybe a couple weeks earlier in the year, he's just not that highly owned. And he's never a terrible value either. And it just fits these Kansas City builds so well, especially if you want to build with Kelsey. Because again, you're not, those salaries for their receivers are just never going to inhibit you from doubling Mahomes. It fits so easily. And we know Juju's got a carved out role if he's good. So it's just hard for me to get away from Juju. I may play him again this week, to be honest.
The other green game that we didn't talk about yet, Carolina at Seattle. And man, can Seattle recapture the magic? I wonder if they let Geno cook a little bit here, with it looking like at this point, Kenneth Walker and DJ Dallas might both be out. But Carolina is also terrible, so they'll probably need to be pushed. I think you're going to get fairly good ownership, even though it hit last week, just where the game script doesn't look appealing and the prices have come up just enough. I think you're going to get fairly good ownership if you think the ceiling is there. And like I said, with a grosser slate, I'm okay. We're probably not going to get 90 again out of the main 3 from Seattle, but you give me 75 to 80 on a slate like this, I think it might be enough.
What do you think about DJ Moore's ownership as it stands right now? Because right now on Draftkings, we have him at 10%, but he's also the second highest value score for a receiver this week.
Yeah, if he's 10%, I think he's a mega smash. I would take the over on that. It's hard to tell like where this stuff's going to come from. Right now, we have Shenault as another one of the pump play options too. But I'll have to check. That might be an old ownership bump that's honestly on his thing. I don't imagine it'll be 10%. That's Shenault. I think that's probably a typo.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, this game's going to be interesting again because, like you said, I mean, total's not great, but the whole slate's totals aren't great. But I
am wrong. Shenault is projecting really well elsewhere. So that's not a typo.
Oh, okay. So maybe it's a Visca week. That would certainly be an interesting punt play. If you're going to go studs and duds, this is another good game to target because you've got Visca there at 3,300. Terrace Marshall, even though last week was kind of a dud for him, he's had games where he's had targets, and he's only $300 more expensive. Again, DJ Moore, to me, seems, I mean, if he's going to come in anywhere between 10 and 15%, seems like an incredible play. At that salary, with his role against a Seattle defense that has given up some big games this year, even though they are on the road. So I kind of like this game again. I mean, we'll see where Seattle's ownership shakes out towards the end of the week, but if the more popular build is going to be the studs and duds build, then maybe you might be able to sneak in there with kind of those mid-tier price guys. Maybe you get a bit of a discount on Lockett and Metcalf.
Yeah, and I don't think Geno would get steamed in any meaningful way, just looking at the quarterback stuff. He's kind of in that good pocket where he's one of the better values on the slate, but not one of the best, which is generally where you want to be for ownership. We could definitely see Jared Goff get steamed with him being so cheap and winning stuff last week. That would be pretty crazy. Some other stuff. Baltimore Pitt with the 36.5 total. Like both the games with really low totals, I oddly think I like a little more than our stuff. It's just so hard because the totals are so bad. But like we've seen like the Huntley to Andrews have a high ceiling in the past. And if Deontay Johnson's out for Pittsburgh, a pass catcher could get there. So while the game, you wouldn't want to play these games as onslaughts. There might be specific pieces like a Huntley skinny with one bring back that could get there. And then Tampa Bay San Fran's like tough for me too, where I think San Fran controls this game and it's really low scoring and boring. If Tampa Bay could actually be efficient on offense, though, it's like you kind of know where the points are coming from, and that would force San Fran to make Purdy throw, which you get some decent price tags and low ownership on the San Fran guys, but ultimately those are tough sells. The Philly Giants stuff. Any thoughts on going back to Philly, Adam?
And they're going to be probably really low owned again. I don't think a lot of people are going to play them, and the ownership that we have right now kind of dictates that as well. The thing we always worry about with Philly is, so if you're going to start building with a Hurts, AJ Brown lineup, you have to make sure that you can fit a balanced remaining lineup in there just because you're eating so much salary. But again, I just like last week, we saw they played Tennessee. Tennessee was kind of an okay team to run it back on a bring back because the salaries weren't that inflated. And the Giants kind of fit that mold too. They're not going to be expensive, and I don't think anyone's really going to want to play them either. You've got Darius Slayton, who is not a great value, but he's got a carved out role there, and he's only 5,300 or 5,100.
Got the big playability too.
Got the big playability. I mean, if you on tight end, I've seen worse plays than Daniel Bellinger
for sure.
And Daniel Jones, if you wanted to save at quarterback, we know he's got that dual threat ability, just like Hurts does. So he's an okay value where he's at right now for his price. So that game, I think the Eagles games are always intriguing in spots like this because we just know they're going to be low owned and they have that ceiling.
Yeah. And this is where it's tough for me, like from an IKB perspective. And we do have these teams kind of in the fast tempo, high volume of plays region. If you're looking at our graphic, which is good for game stacking. Like I'm just worried that it's going to be a little bit of a gross game, and I'm almost more interested in playing Miles Sanders if he's going to be low owned and fading the game. But it's just tough to ever say that like Hurts stacks at 5% are bad just because the ceiling's so strong each week. Other stuff you could possibly do. Josh Allen clearly not fully healthy, and Buffalo's changed the way that they operate a bit, but it looks like to me a Gabe Davis type week where people are off him, the price is down. That's the time. If you wanted to eat Garrett Wilson chalk, who's going to be chalky again for sure. That's part of the reason why that DJ Moore chalk's held down, because I think more people will go to Garrett Wilson.
Yeah.
But that would be, I think, the way to do it would be to play that with something on the Buffalo side. Jacksonville, Tennessee's just more like a mini correlation game, and Houston, Dallas just looks like, again, you get those cheap wide receivers from Houston, but that's not, I don't think Dak's going to have to throw enough to get there. That's more like a mini correlation. You want to play Pollard's huge ceiling here with a cheap wide receiver that gets garbage time. That's a mini you can make, but it's not a full game stack. Any other thoughts from you, Adam?
No, I think you covered most of it, to be honest.
All right. Do you have a dirt plant? I don't really have one, but I don't know if you've got one. Let's do it.
Yeah. I'll give. I don't know if it's entirely like super gross, but we did talk about him earlier in the episode, so I'll go back to Tyler Boyd because I just don't think he's going to be played I don't think he's going to be heavily played, and if you want to get into that game, Bengals-Browns game, the nice thing about Boyd, like we said, he's a wide receiver 3, but he's got a defined role, and it didn't look great last week with maybe the most egregious drop of the year, but Burrow clearly likes him and I think will want to act to him. And so, again, it's not as gross as some of my other plays from previous weeks, but I'll go Tyler Boyd.
Okay. I like it. I'm struggling to figure out a dirt plant. The dirt plant's it's a fine needle to thread because it needs to be realistic enough it could happen, but it can't be something comfy. That kind of defeats the purpose of the dirt plant. I guess if I was really going contrarian, I guess the dirt plant would be going back to Cleveland stuff with Watson. I don't know if I have the stomach for it, but you're going to get 6,400 from a quarterback that previously shown a really high ceiling at like absolutely no ownership. So I guess my dirt plant will be Cleveland passing stacks. An unenthusiastic dirt plant.
The grosser the better.
The grosser the better. All right. That'll do it for us on this edition of the GPP Game Scores. Thanks for checking it out. Definitely an interesting slate. Drew Dinkmeyer and I will be on Establish a Million tomorrow morning, Saturday morning, to break down the full slate from a DFS perspective for tournaments for our subscribers. And Adam will also have the game scores right up tonight. So make sure you all are checking that out. And thanks so much for tuning in.